Today's spotlight is on Daryl Howard of Howard University. Hello, did I say Howard? I said Daryl Howard. I'm sorry, Daryl Michael Scott. Howard, I just, dyslexic. Okay, I'm sure as a professor you understand. You get the.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right, let me give you a little background on Professor Scott. He specializes in modern United States history and has taught at Howard since 2003. He previously taught at the University of Florida and Columbia University and received his doctorate from Stanford University in 1994. His book, Contempt and Pity, Social Policy and the Image of the Damaged Black Psyche, 1880 to 1996, won the Organization of American Historians 1998 James Rawley Prize. He's the editor of 3 books, including a lost manuscript he discovered by Carter G. Woodson's Appeal, which was published in 2008. He has served as director of Black Studies program at the University of Florida and the chair of the Department of History at Howard University. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So let me start by asking you, is there anything we missed in your bio? Or anything you'd like to tell our audience about you? Something we can't Google. That's what I want to know.
No, that's a good bio. And you can Google me too. I'm safe. In other words, so it's all good.
He said he's safe. He said he's safe. Yeah, we believe that. So you've been a professor of history at Howard for how long now?
I guess it's closing in on 17 to 18 years. I've lost count.
Wow. Amazing.
And it's 2003. I guess it's 18.
So your specialty is in Black history or U.S. history? Or
well, since you guys have a sense of humor on this show, I've been studying Negroes seriously all my life. Very long time. So I got my PhD before I went to college and studied Negroes, but in a kind of fairly serious way. But my PhD is in U.S. history, which I got in 1994. So that's been a moment too. That's coming up on I guess almost 30 years.
30 years.
Yeah, I've been doing this a while.
Yep. So Lizzie Andrews, I know you had some questions.
So how did you get started on becoming a Negro history or an African American history scholar? Like a lot of history professors, they choose what genre they want. Like you can have women's history, Black history, U.S. history, government, Jewish history. So how did you hone in? And I know Black professors who are history professors, but who don't teach African American history. So what made you hone in on the history of the brothers?
Oh, I could talk about this, but this is self-absorbed stuff. So I could talk about this forever. But the short version, we talk about ourselves forever. But the short version is that when I was in college, I always loved history. I didn't think I was going to be a quote unquote historian seriously until I was an undergrad. And I was choosing among various things. And I decided that political science, they had to write quick and dirty books. English professors, I looked at what they wrote and I didn't want to write any of that. And then history, I know, I didn't want to write any of that. And so then history, I figured out that people can't really know the past without a historian because there's just too much back there to make sense of. And so I said, oh, they have to listen to me. And so that's how I became a historian.
I got a comment online.
By the way, in U.S. history, as opposed to African history, I got into this a little bit late after the Army, and I didn't think I could pick up enough skills to be an African historian. So there it is. If I'd have had my druthers, I would have been an African historian.
Got a comment online from Gianni Storm. She said, laugh out loud. He's so down to earth.
Already.
Yes.
They love you already, Professor. They love you already.
Okay.
Robbie Rock, did you have a question? Oh, go ahead, Lizzie. You had another question?
I was going to ask, so specifically at Howard, like what classes are you teaching now? Like, is it just straight U.S. history or is there some type of variance?
Well, the good thing about teaching at Howard, you're never the only Black person teaching Black history. So that's a beautiful thing. And so at Howard, I teach U.S. history, and yet these things all intersect because we all know you can't do American history without doing Black history. So my favorite course of nowadays is a course that I just started teaching on from slavery to mass incarceration. So it has a lot of, yeah, it has a lot of mainstream history in it, the mainstream U.S. And then of course this most recent thing about the 13th and all that.
Now, before I get to Robbie Rock, because that was actually my question, you've already brought it up, but I watched the 13th, right? The Netflix documentary about mass incarceration, right? And it's about the 13th Amendment, where it created a loophole to perpetuate slavery. Now, noting that the United States had the highest rate of incarceration in the world, and a significant percentage of them are black. Can you tell us more about that and what the connection is between slavery and mass incarceration? Especially for our audience who
And,
may not be aware of the
okay,
nuance.
well, let me just simply say, you've opened a real can of worms.
I figured.
And yeah, you did it. In fact, you're about to steal the thunder for the rest of your show. But when it comes
Oh,
to,
I didn't mean to. Sorry.
no, you did. No, you don't. No. I've been very upset about this, and I'm loaded for bear. I call these folks 13thers, which lets you know that I don't buy any of it. Okay, that there is no relationship between the 13th Amendment and mass incarceration. And I think these people are into propaganda, hoping that they're going to liberate black people, and in the process, they're promoting bad black history, bad American history, and everything else. But so again, and I just published an article that deals with this, but I'm also writing a book on the topic. So I'm writing a critique of this whole notion that there's such a link between the two. But at the same time, what I'm trying to do is show that there is this history of incarceration in the United States, of convict slavery, as I call it, that is nothing new with the 13th Amendment, that is a very long history, and that black people were at once chattel slaves,
Mhm.
and when we were free, we were convict slaves, okay, with a whole bunch of white folks who were slaves, if we're going to say that convicts can be slaves. But anyway, so you open the can of worms, but I could talk about that for the next 2 hours, because that's what I'm writing about right now.
All right, well, let me let Robbie get a question. And I still want to come back to it. I want to delve in a little deeper. I have more questions on it. But go ahead, Robbie, ask your question.
Yeah, so my question is more as an educator. Have you seen a change in the students who are studying Black history, just given the events of this past year? And for that, I'm talking about the murder of George Floyd, a real rise in Black Lives Matters protests, removal of Civil War effigies. And I'm just wondering if you're noticing a difference in your students because they're part of this younger generation that's affecting the change.
Yeah, well, there have been many changes, and I've been around long enough to see lots of changes in students. Okay, and that's for good and bad, right? Each generation writes its own history, and each generation that comes to college with a different way of looking at the world. Uh, so, but now how we mark a generation is usually arbitrary. But there is a difference in college students well, since the rise of Black Lives Matter. I think that's the critical moment that we're talking about. I don't think there's anything different since George Floyd in terms of what the students, how they come to campus. But it's been a market change in how students think about things since Trayvon Martin. And you can start seeing a change earlier than that. I don't know if you guys remember in 2006 or 8 when when black kids were almost thrown in jail summarily in Louisiana, and they got out of trouble. Since then, there's been a kind of more of students have been more awake, if you will, what they call woke. But since Trayvon Martin, uh, it's been a big deal. There's a big shift,
Even in,
and they're
I would
more.
say, Professor, I would say, Professor, even because this is just my second year at Howard,
Mhm.
and I would say even within like the last year and a half, I've noticed kind of a shift in students where they're becoming more militant. They're becoming more anti-establishment. They're becoming definitely more suspicious of law enforcement, of police. They're becoming more anti-white. And so you were talking about incorporating Black history into lessons. And even though I'm an English professor, I, use Black history as like a launching point, if you will. Like we're writing about Black history, but I tell them this is not, a racist class. I am not trying to get you to hate white people. In fact, I don't want you to hate anyone, but I want to expose you to certain ideas. And so I've had a lot of very interesting conversations with students back and forth. I used to live in Finland. And so when I tell that to my students, it blows their mind. You lived in a country full of white people? Well, we kind of do here,
Why
but
is that
yeah, I
surprising?
did. Yeah, we do.
Yeah,
I,
I can
I,
hear, I hear
so
you, but again,
and this is only in 2 years of teaching at Howard. Only in 2 years of teaching at Howard. Um, so it's been a real eye opener for me because I didn't have that same experience when I was in school, and I didn't go to the HBCU. I went to the University of Colorado for undergrad and then NYU for grad. But I didn't have the same conflict. I had other
no,
conflicts
no,
with
no, no,
race.
but there are generational things going on. But
Mhm.
okay, and even within the last 5 years, if you're talking about the nuances that we see, there's an increasing cynicism and militancy that's coming. Okay,
Yep.
I don't think it's the big shift was Trayvon. Okay,
Yeah.
and by the way, that was a shift away from the belief that the American government, even with a black man as president, was going to transform their lives. And so they didn't really mean to go to the street, if you will. That was not anybody's intention when Obama was elected. But before Obama left office, there was this growing unhappiness and uneasiness about what the state could and could not do for you. And so people were beginning to take it to the street despite Obama. They got off their best behavior that people were on. And I mean, the students were like, oh, wow. And in ways that I never imagined, people really thought that Obama could transform America. They really thought to the very
Yeah, they
day
did.
or,
that he
or
would.
that he was the
And
Black
what,
people's president, or that he was the president for
the
us.
entire United States. And that's right. And by the way, there's a kind of reverse 60s going on, right? At the beginning of the 1960s, there was a kind of liberal mentality among black activists. By the end of the 1960s, you're almost at a kind of radical anti-Americanism among black students. Okay, but anyway, so it's a kind of, but and solidly black. In a way, there's been this move backwards, if you will, from a kind of starts out really pro-black. Black Lives Matter is an awfully black organization. They're unapologetically black. Okay, so we've talked about
Yes.
this going on for a while. So the decade starts out like that. Now, what the shifts that have taken place within this decade has been the rise to the fore of a kind of militant integrationism.
Yep.
Okay, which I wouldn't have called Black Lives Matter was pretty much a multicultural pluralist dimension to it. Okay, increasingly though, you see people and students who really want the American dream, but don't think they're going to get it. And all these obstacles in their way are based on race in their estimation. Okay, and or it's based on class, and you can't even depend on black people who are in positions to help you out. So it's like poor black people or unempowered black people for themselves. They have to struggle for this. And so there's a lot going on with it. So I mean, I agree with what you're saying, but the baseline is still set by Black Lives Matter.
Yeah. All right, Olivia, let's get a question in from you.
My question is one, I respect history because I think history is gonna have us be able to look to the future. My question is though that history seems so like broken and divided, meaning as though what is the missing link, sir, that is missing for us to unite. You know how they used to. We used to unite as a people, and now
When you
we're
say
we're
used to,
all so
when are you
divided.
talking about, Olivia?
I'm talking about when I watched Selma the movie, when I watched all the things people used to do, and now as a people here, we're so divided.
You're talking about
we
black
cannot
people.
unite.
You talking about black people?
I'm talking about black people, people of
I,
color. And what is the missing
You know,
link?
okay, well, let's talk about this. There's this, historically, there's a myth of unity, okay? And at any given moment, when you're on the ground, you find more conflict and division than people present to you in their nice package, right? Whether these are documentaries or whether these are history books, we get these romantic folks who talk about everybody was getting along, that, Malcolm and Martin were heading in the same direction. All
Hmm.
these kinds of analysis. So, but the truth of the matter is, anywhere you go where there's a social movement going on. There are competing players, there are competing ideologies, and there's a lot of ego. Okay,
mm-hmm.
if
Yes.
humans are involved, there are egos at play. And to the extent that Jesus Christ was human, he had an ego too. So wherever you go in dealing with human history, you're going to see that there's a lot of jockeying around. Now, having said that, that's because you're too close. And what I'm saying is, you get too close up on the pictures. When you get in the inside of the tent, if you will, you'll see all kind of division, all kind of name calling, all kind of everything. When you step out, you will find that some people in that tent actually represent the majority of the people, even if it doesn't have to be a great majority, but there is still this general tendency of the people. Okay. And so then when you go back to the 1960s, you can see, well, from the 50s to the 60s, you can see this shift take place. You can see the shift take place from liberal integrationists, liberal integrationism being the main thrust in the 1950s, with people like Malcolm and the Nation of Islam being the ones that's challenging that,
Hmm.
to going into the early to mid 1960s, where the integrationists are on the run. Martin Luther King, one of the reasons that people think that they're converging, Martin and Malcolm, is because Malcolm is actually winning the youth, and he's winning the northern people, and the movement is moving north. And so King is chasing Malcolm, if you will, trying to stay relevant. Okay, and people confuse that, in my estimation, for some kind of Malcolm, excuse me, Martin becoming a radical. Actually, Martin remains, to my way of thinking, a liberal trying to catch up a more kind of a more militant population who's questioning integration.
Yep.
Okay, and so, in other words, when the unity is never quite really there. But then I tell my Black Power friends, did you notice that you outstripped the people? You think COINTELPRO, the government's effort to oppress the black folks who wanted revolution, you think that brought it to an end? Actually, what brought it to an end was that you had outstripped the people, because
Mm.
most black people did not want a revolution. So
I was
there's
gonna say,
always,
I think we look at the past through rose-colored glasses, and we think because we see all these images
yeah,
of unity and things like that, but I don't think it's
it
much
passes
different
for it.
than it
It
was.
passes for it.
Yeah, I don't think it's much
But can
different than
we
it was then than it is now, where we have, like he said, competing ideologies, and people with different views. And like
Mhm.
I would believe a majority of people did not want to fight, um, but were people that did stand up and stand out. Uh,
does
Also, too, I think
history
within a lot of ethnic groups, very quickly, I wanted to call you Olivia. Very quickly, I think within a lot of ethnic groups, people assume that we're all a monolith,
yep,
that we
we're all the
all are
same.
of the
Yep,
same viewpoint,
yep,
and that we
I get that a
all
lot.
should be activists in the same way. And that's just not the
Or even feel
case.
the same way. Some of us don't even feel the
Yeah,
same way about race relations.
but
yeah.
does history foresee us actually coming together again or coming together for a purpose?
Well, I'm going to tell you this. I got one of my favorite phrases. History don't love you. History don't care about you. Okay, so history, history don't care if you ever get together again. History don't care if
Okay.
you lose your mind and forget history altogether. History don't care. So, I mean, I say that to say is that you have the history you make, you have the future you make. Okay? And that nothing's on autopilot in this world. I mean, there are tendencies at any point in time, there are tendencies, right? But it's this thing is like one big game of physics, with all kind of rocks just being flying towards one another, and anything could be put on a new trajectory in a second. Okay, I mean, look, this country could have gone the way it was for a very long time if Trump had decided not to run for
Mm-hmm.
office.
Mm.
Okay, and
Mm,
so it's kind of unfortunate
mm,
he was the
mm.
right or wrong man at the moment. That maybe some of these tendencies might have come about 40 years later, 30 years later. He changed that
So
trajectory.
you're saying he actually sparked a new movement towards
No, but
that's
the
interesting.
tendencies were there. I saw these tendencies. You
Yeah,
know,
that's true.
I saw them in the '90s. Okay, I saw them. I saw people in the South who were white who were sick of immigration by early 1990s. They didn't want any part of it. Okay, but the Republican Party was still strongly for immigration at that point. And as late as 2004 and 5, Bush tried to get immigration reform, and they didn't want any part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, 9/11 changes this. And so there's some things that lead to Trump. There's no doubt about it. The election of Obama is a big one. It's
Yes.
like the black quarterback happened when Obama won. Okay, and so anybody who thought that this thing was going to go back to being white, they saw Obama, and for some people, this blew their mind.
Mm-hmm.
On and on and on. And so I'm saying, but Trump is the one who galvanized all
So
of
you,
it. If it
yeah.
had not been brought together, if it had not been brought together, so there are plenty of antecedents, but there's always these things that could happen. But you have a movement that can bring them about, or you can have a person that brings about a kind of gathering of sentiment among. Because look, he brought out how many people to vote?
Yeah.
I mean,
And it was because of Trump. That's absolutely
it's
right.
because of him.
4 million.
Absolutely.
Well,
And
15
so I'm
million, right? It was
saying
about
that
15.
yeah,
How many
and so
people?
these things do matter.
About
Leadership matters, the times matter, the preconditions could exist, but the right person, the right movement has to come along.
yeah. There is a a question online that I want to get to. We're running out of time, but Matt Davis asked, "How do you think the radical anti-American movement will look like in the future within Black people? Do you think it will die down, remain stagnant, or grow?" And to your point, if saying that Trump kind of created this new radical, well, not created, but kind of sparked,
Galvanized.
kind of
Galvanized.
galvanized and sparked this new radical movement. What do you think it's going to look like in the future?
Well, I'm going to tell you what I think the dominant tendency will be, not to say that it won't happen. Okay. There are a lot of people who would have wanted something much more radical to take place at this moment, whether this be on racial grounds, whether this would be on economic class grounds. But the reality was we have been and we will be fighting white nationalism, what people tried to deny existed. And the dynamic then is, are you for a country that's devoted to white nationalism? Or are you for a country that's devoted to inclusion, devoted to a nation based on civic ideals? Now, in all of this, you got people who are anti-American, or should we say, are just hypercritical of America. Don't even. And by the way, the fact that people won't, who are black, won't outright call themselves anti-American, who really will tell you something. You know, when people refuse a title that seems to be a descriptor, and they refuse it, it's because they don't want to fully own it. So they're not really as anti-American as sometimes they would suggest. They're just simply hypercritical of America and want a new America. Now, sometimes they think that they can kind of bowl over the rest of the country and have their way. For instance, people really believe today that this country will never be anything if we don't get our reparations. So they say the price of peace is reparations. Well, they're still looking for reconciliation. Anytime reparations comes two ways. You take it or somebody gives it to you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So if you take it, it's revolution and stop talking, let's get to fighting. Okay? If you are trying to talk your way through that resolution and have some repair, it means that you really are part of the program. You are part of Americanism. You just want a new deal. Okay, so I'm saying that those folks, most of these reparationists I'm talking about now, in the old days, they used to call themselves black nationalists. Today, they're some of the best integrationists I've ever met. So I don't think there's that much hostility, anti-Americanism out here. I think most people just simply want to be fully incorporated as equals, which they don't think that they were
Exactly.
achieved in
That is exactly
1960.
right.
Exactly.
I totally agree.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. I can't emphasize this enough, at least for me. I am not anti-American. I am so far from being anti-white. However, I want the same privileges. I want access to the same resources. I want
Mhm.
the same type of equality. And I think if you talk to the average Black person, the average
Mhm.
minority, that's all we're asking for. That's all we're asking for.
That's
We live here, we pay
absolutely.
taxes.
But yeah, I like to mess with people's heads because I'm one of the few people who would tell you just straight out right that I'm a liberal American nationalist. But you see, what you just described to me is liberal American nationalism.
Yeah.
You
And see,
just want to be
I
treated
didn't
right.
even have a term for it. I didn't even have a term except for Elizabethism. Elizabethism.
Elizabeth, yeah, that's pretty.
Elizabethism.
But in other words, but what I mean by this is this: you believe in a country in which we can all belong regardless of race. That's number one. That's civic ideals nationalism. Okay. Number two, you love your country. Okay, and you just wanted to love you back. That's why people say we love a country that don't love us back. Okay, all right, that's true. And you would probably fight and die for your country if push came to shove. Most black people have throughout history. Okay, so if you'll defend it, that means you will die for it, which means that's your nationalism is right there. Now, a lot of the people who will say they're black nationalists won't die for black people. You could die for black people every day, any day of your life.
Yeah.
Any
Um,
day. Any day you want to.
I'm a couple of comments online real quick, and then so Mike Winter says 1996 Clinton policy was opposed to immigration. It was an emergency. Folks didn't know that history. Jacqueline Robinson says there's been a panic among some white folks that about statistics indicating that they will be the minority by 2024. Insurrection was a spasm of white nationalism in all its ugliness. And Mike Winter says, just leave me be. Leave
He's
me
referring
be
to
like
me.
you. Say it again. What'd you say?
I thought he was referring to me with that, but go ahead.
Yeah, I think he is actually. Now I realized it as I was reading it. All right, Kevin Thaxton says France received reparations from Haiti. English slave owners received reparations from their
We
slaves
don't even have
after
to
the
go to
slaves were.
France. We don't even have to go to France. Hello, Asian Americans receive reparations from the
That's
U.S.
true.
government over World War II.
That's
So,
true.
but that's a completely different topic. But
Reparations, yeah.
reparations have happened here before. Um, I just particularly feel in 2021 we're not likely to get it all these years later. That doesn't mean we still shouldn't fight for it. But as the clock is ticking, the excuse becomes, like Herschel Walker said incorrectly,
Your
slavery
boy.
was 130 years ago. So it's there's a lot. That's a complex topic. But yes, Asian Americans got reparations for World War II, for the internment camps that they were placed in this country from World War II. So it's been done before on U.S. soil. My last parting shot.
I mean, I'm going to tell you this. I'm just going, again, yeah, we all owe reparations. But let me say this, and this is another one of these unpopular things I'll say. I'm a ghetto boy.
You mean
And
a rap group
Ghetto boy. The
ghetto
rap
boys?
crew.
I grew up in a very bad neighborhood.
Okay.
And
In
people could
Chicago,
owe
you're from
you.
Chicago, right?
Yeah, people could owe you, but if you can't collect, they don't owe you.
Mm. That's an interesting concept.
And if the people who oppressed you would pay you reparations, then they're not the evil monsters you said they were.
Hmm.
Mm.
And if you had the power to take the money, you wouldn't need the money.
Hmm.
That's true.
So all this reparations talk is about, it's really not a demand, it's really a complaint, it's really a whine. And it really eats up a lot of intellectual and political energy.
Uh,
Now you're old, and that ain't gonna get you nothing to eat tonight. Not gonna get you anything to eat tomorrow. Okay? And the same people who are now trying to disenfranchise you so that they can rule you as a white minority, You think they're going to give you reparations without you taking them? See, this is where it gets unreal for me. And even though this is current events, I'm just a historian enough to know that, historically speaking, if they give you reparations, it's a dime. It's not even a dime on the dollar. And it's because it costs them nothing. It costs them nothing, and it's a token gesture.
Yeah.
But if they owe you a lot, you're going to have to come get it. Okay? Because they owe you too much.
I think we're going to have the good professor back to
I
talk
think
about
so too, because we got some more stuff to talk about. And
We
unfortunately, we're so out of time.
We didn't even talk about what's the.
I know. I was just thinking about that. I'm like, oh my God. I was gonna.
I told you.
But one.
the father
I
of Black
told you.
history, Carter G. Woodson.
Let's at least get that in. So let's at least talk a bit about that, and that'll be. I'll give you a final word on that.
Well, let me just say this.
Carter G.
Okay. We're coming up on the centennial of Negro History Week now, Black History Month. And what people really need to understand is that Carter G. Woodson has created the longest running celebration of American history in the history of this country.
Mm.
February used to be American History Month. It failed as American History Month. Black people have made American history work by promoting Black history in February. It's the only history you're really going to get in a public celebration.
All right. So I did want to still give you any last words that you want to share with us, anything you want to impart on us before we let you go.
Well, keep looking out because I am going to publish. I wrote an essay on 13therism, the scandal of 13therism.
Ooh, I
can send you guys a link. And then I'm working on a book on the topic, so I'll be in trouble about that. And I'm not going to write about reparations because I don't want to lose my last 5 friends.
And you were an amazing guest. We really appreciate you coming on, and we will have to get you back if you're up for it. We will have to get you back to talk again.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Professor Daryl Michael Scott from Howard University. Thank you so much for joining us.
Take care.
All right.
Thank you.